In the shadowed belly of Antebellum, Mississippi, where the Mississippi River whispers ancient curses, a slave girl named Annie Turner wields secrets from Eden's forbidden tree. Her hands mend the broken, but one wrong leaf, and death comes calling like an avenging angel. Was her gift from God or the devil himself? Tonight, uncover the healer's haunting legacy. The cotton fields of Tallahatchie County stretch like an endless sea of white under the merciless sun of 1838, their bowls bursting open like wounds in the red clay earth. The air hung heavy with the scent of sweat-soaked soil and the distant hum of cicadas, a relentless chorus that seemed to mock the bent backs of the enslaved. Whips cracked like thunderclaps, echoing the wrath of an Old Testament god, while overseers on horseback cast long shadows that slithered across the rows like serpents in the garden. In this hellish paradise of profit and pain, knowledge was the ultimate sin, a fruit too tempting, too dangerous for those deemed unworthy. For in the antebellum South, ignorance was the chain that bound tighter than iron, and any spark of understanding threatened to ignite the whole infernal machine. Yet into this world stepped Annie Turner, a girl whose very presence seemed to bend the light around her, as if she carried an invisible aura of ancient wisdom. She arrived on a spring morning when the dogwoods bloomed like fragile promises of redemption, their white petals scattering in the breeze like ashes from a sacrificial fire. Purchased at the Natchez auction block by Thomas Hartwell, a man whose fortune was built on the broken bodies of others, Annie was listed in the ledger as nothing more than chattel, female, approximately 16, fit for field work. No birthplace noted, no lineage traced, erased, like so many before her, into the void of forced forgetfulness. But erasure could not touch what burned within her soul. From the moment her bare feet touched the Hartwell plantation's rutted path, Annie observed the world with eyes that pierced deeper than any overseer's glare. She noted the way sunlight filtered through the Spanish moss dangling from live oaks, casting ethereal patterns that whispered of hidden patterns in nature's design. The rustle of leaves in the underbrush spoke to her of secrets buried in the earth, remedies waiting to be unearthed. Like buried treasures from a biblical parable. In those first days, as the other new arrivals hunched over their tasks, picking cotton until their fingers bled raw, the sticky fibers clinging like accusations, Annie's gaze wandered to the fringes. Wild herbs poked through the fence lines, yarrow with its feathery leaves, elderberry bushes heavy with dark fruit that promised both healing and hallucination. She pocketed seeds surreptitiously, feeling their tiny forms pulse with potential life, much like the seeds of rebellion sown in whispered spirituals after dark. The quarters at night were a cacophony of muffled sobs and fervent prayers, lit by the faint glow of pine knot torches that flickered like uncertain faith. Here, among the crude cabins with their dirt floors and leaking roofs, Annie first encountered Ruth, the elder healer whose wrinkled hands had soothed generations of suffering. Ruth was a pillar of quiet strength, her skin etched with scars like the bark of an ancient cypress, each one a testament to endurance under divine trial. For 40 years, she had gathered roots and leaves under the cover of moonlight, brewing teas that chased away fevers as if exorcising demons. Her knowledge was passed down orally, a fragile thread in the tapestry of stolen African traditions blended with the harsh realities of the New World. When young Samuel's cough rattled through the quarters like a death rattle, his small chest heaving, eyes glassy with fever, Ruth set to work by the fire's glow. She stripped bark from a wild cherry tree, its scent sharp and bitter, mingling with the honeysuckle's sweetness in a pot over the flames. The steam rose like incense in a forbidden ritual, carrying prayers for mercy. Annie watched from the shadows, her silhouette merging with the cabin's rough-hewn walls. Her breath was steady, her expression unreadable, but her mind raced like a river in flood. "You're using too much of that cherry," she murmured, her voice soft as falling rain, yet carrying the weight of undeniable truth. Ruth paused, her gnarled fingers hovering over the brew. Surprise flickered in her eyes, mingled with the wariness of one who had seen too many false prophets. "And what makes you think that, child?" she asked, her tone laced with the wisdom of Job's patience. Annie stepped closer, the firelight dancing across her face, highlighting the quiet intensity in her dark eyes. "The bark holds a poison, hidden like sin in the heart. A pinch opens the lungs, lets the spirit breathe free. But overload it, and it twists the gut like divine retribution, expelling more than just the illness." She spoke not with pride, but with the certainty of one attuned to the Creator's blueprint, the intricate balance where life and death danced on a knife's edge. Ruth, sensing no malice, only pure insight, adjusted her mixture. Together, they added woundwort, its white blooms gathered from the barn's dry shadows, symbols of purity amid corruption. The tea worked its miracle. Samuel's cough faded like a storm retreating, his laughter returning to echo through the quarters like a hymn of thanksgiving. Word spread quietly, carried on the wings of hope. This new girl, Annie, she knew things. Ruth took her under wing, or so she thought. But Annie absorbed knowledge like parched earth drinks rain, not learning anew, but awakening dormant memories, perhaps echoes from ancestors who communed with spirits in distant lands. By autumn, when the leaves turned blood-red as if stained by the land's violent history, Annie had eclipsed her mentor. She treated a fever with willow bark, its bitter essence drawing out heat like confession draws out sin. For an infected wound on a field hand's finger, swollen and pulsing with angry red lines, she crafted a poultice of wild garlic and pine resin, the aroma sharp and cleansing, warding off corruption as faith wards off temptation. The quarters buzzed with her presence now. Slaves slipped to her cabin after sundown, their footsteps soft on the packed earth, carrying ailments that spoke of deeper wounds, stomachs knotted from meager rations, backs aching from the lash's kiss, spirits broken by the weight of bondage. Annie listened in the dim light of a single candle, its flame wavering like uncertain hope. She never turned anyone away, her remedies offered freely, like grace undeserved. But beneath the healing lay a shadow, a profound understanding that every plant held duality, much like the human soul, capable of salvation or damnation. Willow could soothe, but in excess, it thinned the blood like a slow bleed toward judgment. Garlic purified, yet could blister if mishandled, a reminder of fire's purifying wrath. And so, Annie began her secret archive, defying the laws that forbade literacy among the enslaved. In the hush of midnight, when the plantation slept under a canopy of stars that seemed to judge from afar, she etched symbols into bark, swirls for potency, crosses for caution, mimicking the biblical marks of Cain or the seals of Revelation. Pebbles arranged in hollow logs formed patterns only she could read, maps to hidden groves where deadly nightshade bloomed like temptation's fruit, or where foxglove hid its heart-stopping secrets. These were her scriptures, a testament to nature's moral order, where excess invited divine correction. Winter 1839 brought the first crack in the barrier between quarters and big house. Snow dusted the fields like a false mantle of purity, hiding the ugliness beneath. Caroline Hartwell, the planter's youngest, lay wasting from scarlet fever, her skin flushed crimson as if marked by the blood of innocence spilled on this land. The rash crept like accusing fingers across her throat, her breaths shallow and ragged in the opulent bedroom with its four-poster bed and lace curtains billowing like ghosts. Dr. Edmund Foster, in his starched coat and with instruments gleaming like instruments of torture, had bled her pale, dosed her with calameled mercury that purged but poisoned, turning her mouth black as sin stain. Desperation clawed at Thomas Hartwell's heart, a man whose Bible sat dust-covered on his shelf, yet who prayed now with the fervor of a sinner facing the abyss. It was Martha, the house slave with eyes downcast and voice trembling, who bridged the worlds. Master, there's Annie in the quarters. She's pulled souls back from the brink when all else failed. Hartwell's pride warred with paternal terror, but love or fear of loss won. Annie was summoned, crossing the threshold into the big house like Moses entering Pharaoh's court, her cloth bundle clutched like a prophet's staff. The room smelled of sickness and camphor, the air thick with unspoken hierarchies. Annie stood at the bedside, her gaze sweeping over Caroline's frail form, the erratic pulse at her neck, the labored rise of her chest. Silence stretched, broken only by the tick of a grandfather clock, measuring time like grains in an hourglass of fate. The mercury's gotta stop, Annie said at last, her words falling like stones into still water. Dr. Foster's face purpled with rage, his voice booming, insolent girl. Calomel purges the impurity. But Annie remained unmoved, her calm a shield of faith. It's turning her insides to war. The fever's one enemy, the poison's another. Like fighting fire with brimstone. Hartwell, caught in the crossfire, chose the unknown path. Annie's remedies unfolded like a ritual, willow bark tea, steaming and bitter, to tame the fever's flame, which hazel compresses, cool and astringent, soothing the rash like balm on a troubled spirit, elderberry infusion to bolster the body's defenses, its dark berries evoking the wine of communion. For 2 days, Annie tended her, adjusting doses with intuitive precision, her hands gentle yet firm, murmuring prayers under her breath, invocations. Blending African rhythms with Christian pleas for mercy. On the third dawn, as sunlight pierced the curtains like divine light through stained glass, Caroline's fever shattered. Sweat beaded on her brow like holy water, her eyes clearing to see the world anew. The big house echoed with relieved sighs, but beneath lay a seismic shift. Hartwell rewarded Annie with a blanket, thin recompense, and a garden plot, a small Eden amid the wilderness. Yet his gaze upon her changed, no longer mere property, but a vessel of mysterious power, perhaps touched by the Almighty or something darker. Word rippled outward, like rings on a pond disturbed by a stone of miracle. Neighboring planters, their mansions glowing with candlelight against the night, began to summon her. For migraines that plagued Hartwell's wife, Constance, pains that throbbed like guilt unconfessed, Annie brewed feverfew and skullcap, the herb's earthy scent filling the parlor, easing the torment more than any laudanum. When Hartwell himself writhed from a kidney stone, sharp as the thorns crowning Christ, her decoction of hydrangea and gravel root passed it swiftly, leaving him humbled before her quiet authority. By 1840, Annie was hired out, ferried to distant plantations under armed guard, her value now monetary as well as mystical. She eased childbirths where mothers screamed like souls in purgatory, drawing forth life with herbs that numbed pain and stanched blood. Mysterious ailments that stumped white doctors yielded to her touch, fevers banished, infections quelled. Success bloomed, but in the South's twisted soil, it bore poisoned fruit. Whispers grew. Was Annie's knowledge natural or supernatural? Did she converse with angels or demons? Planters locked doors at night, tasting food with suspicion, fearing the line between healer and harbinger blurred. The first shadow fell in summer 1841 at the Lawrence plantation, where dysentery raged like a plague from Exodus. Annie arrived amid the moans of the afflicted, the air foul with sickness and despair. She orchestrated recovery, boiling water sanctified with herbs, poultices drawing out toxins. Lives were spared, but Richard Lawrence, the overseer, a brute whose whip sang psalms of cruelty, fell ill unrelated. Stomach cramps after supper, vomiting like expulsion of sins, tremors seizing his limbs. 3 days, and he lay cold, his eyes staring vacant as if beholding eternal judgment. Dr. Foster muttered cholera, but doubts lingered. Slaves murmured of divine justice, eyes flicking to Annie, seen near the kitchen garden with basket in hand. No proof, no accusations, but fear took root, twisting like kudzu over the heart. 6 months later, winter 1842 cloaked the land in frost, mirroring the chill in men's souls. At George Bentley's estate, Annie treated his mother's arthritis, joints swollen like burdens of unrepented wrongs, with a liniment that restored mobility, its warmth spreading like forgiveness. Bentley, ever the inquisitor in amateur's guise, probed her secrets. Tell me of these plants, girl. What magic do they hold? Annie, guardian of her lore, shared sparingly the common ones, like peppermint for calm, ginger for fire in the belly. But her reluctance hung in the air like incense, a veil over depths where poison and potion intertwined, where knowledge echoed the tree of good and evil. In this world of masters and slaves, Annie's gift challenged the order, hinting at a higher justice where the oppressed might wield the scales. And as the whispers grew, so did the dread. What if her hands, meant for healing, turned to harvest retribution? The humid veil of spring 1843 draped over the Hartwell plantation like a shroud woven from Spanish moss and unspoken fears, the air thick with the perfume of blooming magnolias that masked the underlying rot of decay in the soil. Lanterns swung lazily from porch hooks, casting elongated shadows that twisted across the manicured lawns like fingers of accusation, pointing toward the slave quarters where flickering cookfires danced like defiant spirits in the gathering dusk. In this realm where the Bible's parables of sowing and reaping took on a literal, brutal edge, Annie Turner's name had become a talisman invoked in hushed prayers for healing, yet whispered with the dread reserved for witches in Puritan tales. Her knowledge, once a beacon of hope amid the ceaseless toil, now cast a pall over the big houses, where silver candelabras illuminated faces etched with growing paranoia. Planters sipped their evening bourbon with trembling hands, eyes darting to the darkened windows, wondering if the very herbs seasoning their meals carried echoes of Eden's forbidden fruit. Annie moved through this shifting landscape with the quiet grace of a biblical prophetess, her bare feet leaving faint imprints in the red dirt paths that wound like veins through the cotton fields. Her cabin, a humble structure of weathered pine logs chinked with mud, stood at the edge of the quarters, its thatched roof sagging under the weight of accumulated rains like the burdens of generations pressed upon her slight frame. Inside, by the light of a single tallow candle that sputtered and popped like suppressed confessions, she tended her secret garden plot, a small patch granted by Hartwell himself. Here, herbs grew in orderly rows, lavender for calming restless souls, chamomile for easing the pangs of childbirth, each plant a verse in her unwritten gospel of natural lore. But woven among them were the dual-natured ones, foxglove with its bell-shaped blooms tolling warnings of heart-stopping potency. Hemlock lurking like Judas in the shadows, its innocuous leaves belying the paralysis it could induce. Annie harvested with ritualistic care, murmuring incantations that blended African ancestral rhythms with snatches of psalms, "The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away," her voice a soft melody against the cricket's nocturnal choir. Yet the whispers had evolved into a cacophony of suspicion, fueled by the tragic folly at George Bentley's estate the previous winter. Bentley, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and a penchant for amateur botany, had probed Annie's secrets like a thief prying at a locked chest. His library, lined with leather-bound volumes on natural philosophy, glowed under gas lamps that hissed like serpents, shelves groaning under the weight of pressed specimens and alchemical tomes. Annie, summoned to alleviate his mother's arthritic torment, joints swollen and creaking like the gates of Hades, had shared fragments of her wisdom reluctantly, her words measured as if dispensing Holy Communion. "Lobelia for the breath of life, easing lungs choked by affliction," she explained, her fingers crushing the leaves to release a pungent aroma that filled the room like incense at a funeral. "Poke root to quell the fires of inflammation, but only the young shoots, tender as a lamb's fleece, lest it turn to venom. And bloodroot for purifying the vital streams, drawing out impurities like confession draws out sin." Bentley, eyes gleaming with the hubris of a man who believed knowledge could be seized like land, dismissed her cautions. Alone in his study, surrounded by flickering shadows that mimicked the dance of lost souls, he ventured into the woods at dawn, dew soaking his boots as birdsong mocked his ignorance. He uprooted poke in its entirety, roots gnarled and bitter, berries plump with latent death, mistaking abundance for virtue. Brewing a tonic in a copper pot over a hearth fire that crackled like judgment's flames, he sipped it eagerly, envisioning vitality. But within hours, agony seized him, stomach convulsing as if expelling demons, vision blurring into a haze of regretful apparitions. By nightfall, his body lay rigid on the Persian rug, face contorted in eternal surprise, the air heavy with the acrid scent of vomit and failed ambition. His widow, veil drawn like a barrier against the truth, discovered his scrawled notes, ramblings of replication, mentions of that slave girl's elixirs. Word spread through drawing rooms lit by crystal chandeliers, where ladies in silk gowns fanned themselves against the heat of scandal. If Bentley's emulation brought doom, what horrors lurked in Annie's originals? Was she a healer, or a harbinger of divine wrath, her remedies laced with the potential for retribution? In the slave quarters, reverence mingled with unease like oil and water in a baptismal font. Gathered around smoldering fires that cast ruddy glows on weathered faces, they shared tales under the star-studded canopy, voices low to evade the overseer's patrols. "Annie sees into a body's soul," one elder murmured, his voice gravelly from years of field chants. "Looks at you and knows the affliction before you speak, like the prophets reading omens in the entrails." Another nodded, eyes wide in the firelight. "She whispers to the plants afore pick and askin permission like their kin to the spirits." And stories of her solitary forays into the deep woods, where ancient cypresses stood sentinel like guardians of forgotten realms, returning with enigmatic bundles, roots twisted as serpents, leaves veined with mystery. These narratives carried spiritual weight, evoking African deities blended with Christian saints, Annie cast as a modern Miriam, leading through affliction but shadowed by the risk of Pharaoh's fury. Among the white elite, eagerness curdled into caution. Planters' wives, in parlors scented with rosewater and pipe tobacco, hesitated before summoning her. When desperation struck, a child racked by convulsions, skin hot as brimstone, Annie arrived under watchful eyes, her bundle unwrapped slowly to reveal innocuous bundles. "Watch every motion," they instructed house slaves, who hovered like angels of doubt, noting each herb added to the pot bubbling over the kitchen hearth. The steam rose in curls, carrying earthy fragrances that now evoked not comfort, but conspiracy. Thomas Hartwell, pacing the veranda of his Greek Revival mansion, columns gleaming white as hypocritical purity, sensed the tide turning. Requests for Annie dwindled, replaced by sidelong glances at social gatherings, where crystal glasses clinked like accusations. Rumors swirled in smoke-filled studies. "She knows too much," one planter drawled, cigar ash falling like fallen grace. "Dangerous for a slave to hold such power, could turn it against us, like Samson in the temple." Hartwell summoned Annie to the main house one twilight in spring 1843, the sun dipping below the horizon like a betrayed promise, painting the sky in hues of blood and fire. The parlor was opulent yet oppressive, heavy drapes muffling the outside world, a grandfather clock ticking inexorably like the countdown to judgment. He stood by the mantel, fingers tracing his silver-framed Bible, his face lined with the conflicts of a man torn between profit and piety. "You've stirred the hornet's nest, girl," he said, voice gravelly with unease, eyes searching her impassive features for cracks. Annie stood before him, hands folded as in prayer, her simple calico dress a stark contrast to the room's velvet upholstery. "I only mend what's broken, master," she replied, her tone even as still water's hiding depths. "Healing ain't harm," he pressed, "that overseer Lawrence dead after your visit." Annie met his gaze, unflinching as Daniel in the lion's den. "He was stricken before I knew, too far gone for earthly aid, like the Pharaoh's heart, hardened beyond redemption. And Bedley, he tempted fate, harvesting wrong, ignorant warnings. Plants demand respect, like the Lord's laws." Hartwell sighed, believing her innocence yet ensnared by societal snares. "Be transparent," he commanded. "Reveal your ways, demystify the magic, show it's mere medicine, not sorcery." She nodded, but in her heart, she knew, fear fed on ignorance, and no light could fully dispel shadows born of guilt. The ensuing year unfolded like a slow unraveling tapestry, threads of coincidence weaving a noose of dread. Annie complied, explaining remedies with patient clarity. "This yarrow staunches blood like faith staunches doubt," she'd say, crushing leaves whose scent pierced the air like revelation. Yet paranoia persisted. When an elderly debtor to Hartwell, a man who once stiffed payment for Annie's services, collapsed in a stroke, his face twisting as if glimpsing hell, tongues wagged, Annie had been there weeks prior. Crops withered at a neighboring farm where she'd been mistreated, vines curling black as if cursed by locusts from Exodus, though drought and neglect were the true culprits. Patterns emerged in fevered minds, attributing to Annie omnipotence she disavowed, her knowledge a mirror reflecting their own sins of oppression. By summer 1844, the air shimmered with heat and hostility, cicadas screaming like tormented souls. A consortium of planters approached Hartwell under the shade of a sprawling live oak, its branches drooping like judgmental arms. They offered gold for Annie's relocation to Louisiana's wilds, framed as benevolence, but reeking of expulsion like Eve from paradise. Hartwell wavered in his study, ledger open to profits now vanished, his family's unease palpable, Constance avoiding Annie's shadow, Caroline, once saved by her hands, now averting eyes as if fearing the mark of Cain. Fate intervened in late August, the evening sky bruised with storm clouds, thunder grumbling like divine discontent. Hartwell dined in the candlelit hall, silverware clinking against china, the meal featuring greens from the kitchen garden, collards glossy with dew, mustard leaves vibrant as false hope. He savored each bite, praising cook Betty's skill, the flavors earthy and robust. But within the hour, torment struck, abdomen clenching like a fist of wrath, vomit surging like purged transgressions. By midnight, he writhed on silk sheets soaked with sweat, vision fracturing into kaleidoscopic nightmares, heart fluttering erratically as a caged bird sensing doom. Dr. Foster arrived on horseback, coat flapping like raven wings, his examination hurried in the lamplight's glow. "Poison," he whispered to Constance, her face pale as a ghost in the mirror. "But whence?" Suspicion arrowed to Annie, though she'd been barred from the house. Summoned nonetheless, she entered like a reluctant savior, the air charged with electric tension. She assessed Hartwell, pulse erratic under her fingers, breath labored as penitence, then queried the meal's origins. Led to the garden by Betty, moonlight silvering the rose, Annie knelt amid the vegetables, soil cool and yielding like confessional earth. Her eyes fixed on intruders, white snakeroot, flowers blooming innocently white as hypocritical vows, infiltrating the beds. "White snakeroot," she declared, voice cutting the night like prophecy. "Poison leeches with the rains, tainting the greens, like sin seeping into the soul unnoticed." Betty trembled. "Just weeds, I thought, harmless as lambs." Annie rose, dust clinging to her hem like remnants of mortality. Back in the house, she relayed to Foster and Constance, milk sickness from cows, but direct from plants here. Heart and liver bear the brunt, organs faltering under toxic burden. Her remedy, charcoal from willow, absorbing toxins like absolution, boneset tea fortifying the spirit, bland sustenance and rest, a penance for recovery. Hartwell mended as foretold, strength. Returning like Lazarus from the tomb, Foster verifying via texts the plant's peril. Vindication should have crowned Annie a testament to her grace. Instead, autumn 1844 birthed deeper dread, leaves falling like discarded illusions. Whispers evolved, how knows she poisoned so intimately? Studied them as healers, perhaps planted the root herself, a ploy for heroism. Paranoia festered in cotton gins, hum in church pews, murmurs, logic twisted as kudzu. A delegation confronted Hartwell in October, winds howling like banshees outside his windows. Not deeds, but potential, they argued, faces stern as Old Testament judges. She holds death's recipes, disguised in meals, shared in whispers. Intolerable in bondage's grasp. Hartwell, life debt weighing like millstones, conceded. Annie would be sold to trader Morris Hampton, bound for Arkansas wilds, exile framed as mercy, her knowledge banished like forbidden scrolls. News reached Annie in November's chill, frost rhyming the fields like judgment's edge. She absorbed it stoically, querying only timing. December, afore rains mire the paths, Hartwell replied, averting eyes from her serene gaze, which held mirrors to his soul's unease. In the quiet of her cabin, as winds whispered through cracks like spirits consoling, Annie pondered her fate, knowledge unchained, a light in darkness, yet pursued by fears it illuminated. The plantation slumbered under a moon that watched impassively, stars twinkling like distant promises of redemption in a world steeped in shadow. The chill of early December 1844 seeped into the bones of Tallahatchie County like the cold hand of fate, wrapping the Hartwell plantation in a gray mantle of frost that glittered cruelly under a weak winter sun. The fields lay fallow, their skeletal stalks whispering secrets to the wind, while smoke curled lazily from the chimneys of the big house, carrying the scent of burning hickory that mingled with the earthy decay of fallen leaves. In this season of reckoning, where the Bible's tales of exile and judgment felt all too real, Annie Turner moved through her final days with the serene inevitability of a prophet foreseeing the end. Her cabin, a humble sanctuary at the quarter's edge, stood as a testament to quiet resistance, its walls etched with faint scratches that only she could decipher, a hidden codex of nature's dual-edged gifts. Seeds from her garden plot lay sorted on a rough-hewn table, tiny orbs of potential life and death, glowing softly in the lantern's amber light like relics from a forgotten altar. Annie had received the news of her sale with the composure of one who had stared into the abyss before. Hartwell's words, delivered in the shadowed parlor where portraits of stern ancestors glared down like judgmental angels, hung in the air like a sentence from on high. December, before the rains turned the roads to mire, he muttered, his eyes skittering away from hers as if fearing to glimpse the depths of her soul. She nodded, retreating to her domain without protest, her footsteps soft on the frost-crackled path, leaving imprints that faded like ephemeral prayers. In the weeks that followed, she tended to the afflicted in the quarters with renewed urgency, binding wounds with yarrow poultices that drew out infection like confession draws out sin, brewing teas from elderberry to fortify against the winter's chill grip. To the younger women, wide-eyed and eager as fledgling disciples, she imparted fragments of her lore, catnip for the babe's colic. Steeped gentle as a mother's lullaby, raspberry leaf to ease the birth pangs, strengthening the womb like faith strengthens the spirit. Her voice, low and rhythmic, carried the cadence of ancient chants, blending the rhythms of African griots with the solemnity of Old Testament verses. Yet beneath this veneer of benevolence, Annie prepared for departure with meticulous care, as if orchestrating a final sacrament. She distributed seats to trusted souls, Judith, the sharp-eyed newcomer, Samuel, now grown from the boy whose cough she had banished, Ruth, her aging mentor whose hands trembled but whose memory held firm. Plant these where the sun kisses the earth at dawn, she instructed, her fingers pressing the packets into their palms like bestowing Holy Communion. In the deep woods, under canopies of live oaks draped in moss like mourning veils, she carved final notations into bark, swirls denoting potency, crosses warning of peril, a symbolic language that echoed the seals of revelation, preserving knowledge against the flood of forgetfulness. No fear marred her features, no anger twisted her brow. She moved with the quiet assurance of one attuned to a higher order, where survival was not mere endurance but a sacred act of defiance against the profane. But as Annie's exodus loomed, a peculiar shadow fell over the white families of the county, a series of afflictions that crept in like thieves in the night, stirring whispers of divine retribution. It began with James Crawford, the bombastic planter whose voice had thundered loudest in the delegation to Hartwell, demanding Annie's banishment like a Pharisee calling for crucifixion. In the opulent dining room of his mansion, lit by crystal chandeliers that cast prismatic rainbows on damask tablecloths, he clutched his temples one evening, the world spinning in vertiginous chaos. Headaches pounded like hammers forging chains, dizziness blurring his vision until the room tilted like a ship in stormy seas. Dr. Foster, summoned on horseback through the misty dawn, probed with cold instruments and furrowed brow, but found no tumor, no fever, only mystery. Rest and laudanum, he prescribed, his voice echoing hollow in the high-ceilinged chamber, but the symptoms lingered, fading only after days of torment, leaving Crawford pale and haunted, his once boisterous laugh reduced to a wary murmur. Then came William Hughes, the rumor-monger whose tongue had spread tales of Annie's sorcery like wildfire through dry grass. In the stables of his estate, surrounded by the musky scent of hay and horseflesh, he collapsed without warning, body crumpling like a puppet with severed strings, consciousness fleeing into void. Minutes later, he awoke disoriented on the straw-strewn floor, servants hovering like anxious spirits, their faces etched with unspoken fears. These fainting spells recurred, at supper, fork midway to mouth, in the fields, overseeing the winter preparations. No memory bridged the gaps, only a lingering fog in his mind, as if his soul had wandered the borderlands of Sheol. Foster examined again, listening to the erratic thump of Hugh's heart through his stethoscope, but detected no ailment of the flesh, perhaps nerves, he ventured, but the word hung heavy with implication, a veil over deeper terrors. Robert Finch, the overseer whose whip had sung cruel hymns and who had bellowed that Annie deserved lashes for her errors, suffered the most visceral torment. In the dead of night, his modest cabin alive with the creak of settling timbers, nightmares assailed him like demons from the pit. He dreamed of vines bursting from his belly, roots coiling through veins like invasive sins, leaves unfurling in his lungs until breath became agony. Screams tore from his throat, waking his wife who clutched the bedsheets like a shield against the unseen. For a week, sleep evaded him, eyes ringed in shadows dark as bruises, his days blurred by exhaustion that weighed like the millstone of guilt. Foster's potions offered no respite, the dreams persisted, vivid as prophetic visions, until they ebbed, leaving Finch a shell, his bravado shattered. None perished. No poison was detected in blood or bile. Foster's examinations, conducted in well-lit parlors where the scent of camphor warred with fierce sweat, revealed naught but the ordinary frailties of the body. Yet the coincidences gnawed like rats in the granary. Each man had dined on meals touched by enslaved hands, greens wilted in iron pots over hearth fires, bread kneaded by calloused fingers, water drawn from wells where buckets dipped into shadowy depths. In a world where the oppressed moved invisibly through the privileged domains, polishing silver, stirring stews, tending gardens, the line between accident and intent blurred like mist over the Mississippi. Fear, once pinpointed on Annie, metastasized into paranoia, a spiritual malaise that infected the county's elite. Every twinge became suspect, a stomach cramp after supper, evoking memories of Bentley's demise, a headache in the afternoon heat, whispering of Crawford's woe. Wives tasted soups with tentative sips, eyes flicking to the kitchen slaves, children were watched for signs of tampering, doors bolted at dusk, as if locks could bar the intangible. Annie observed from afar, her demeanor an enigma calm as the eye of a storm, her hands busy with salves and infusions for her own people. She uttered no gloating words, offered no cryptic smiles, she simply existed, a living reminder of knowledge's power, her presence a mirror reflecting the oppressor's vulnerabilities. The air in the quarters hummed with subdued energy, slaves exchanging glances heavy with meaning, their spirituals sung softer, laced with undertones of deliverance, swing low, sweet chariot, come and for to carry me home. As December deepened, the cold sharpening like a blade, Morris Hampton's arrival was heralded by a terse message, ink smudged on parchment like a flawed decree. Hartwell delivered the final summons on a Saturday afternoon, the sun slanting low, casting long shadows that stretched like accusatory fingers across the veranda. Dawn tomorrow, have your things ready. Annie nodded, retreating to her cabin where she kindled a forbidden fire, flames leaping defiantly despite edicts against unattended blazes. The quarters fell silent, a respectful hush enveloping her like a cloak, slaves sensing the passing of an era, their eyes averted in solemn tribute. Midnight brought a soft rap at her door, the sound cutting the stillness like a summons from the beyond. Judith stood there, silhouetted against the star-pricked sky, her young face etched with determination, eyes gleaming with the hunger of one seeking light in darkness. "Teach me," she pleaded, voice a whisper carried on the frost-laced breeze. "You're leavin', and the knowledge dies with you." Annie paused, the fire's glow dancing across her features, weighing the peril. Teaching was heresy, punishable by the lash or worse. Yet to withhold was to sever the chain, to let wisdom perish like seed on rocky ground. She widened the door, ushering Judith into the warmth, where shadows played on walls like specters at a vigil. They sat cross-legged by the hearth, the crackle of wood punctuating Annie's urgent words, time a thief stealing the night. Willow bark for fevers, boiled slow to draw the essence, cooling the blood like mercy quells wrath. She demonstrated with dried strips, crumbling them into a tin cup, the bitter scent rising like incense.
Yarrow stems the flow of lifeblood, binding wounds as faith binds the broken.
Ginger root, slice thin, for stomachs twisted by hunger or fear, steep it with honey if you can steal it, soothing like balm in Gilead. But Annie delved deeper, into the shadowed realms, foxglove, purple bells tolling caution, a whisper steadies a fluttering heart, but a breath more stops it cold, like judgment's final call. Water hemlock, innocuous as parsnips, devours from within, convulsions seizing the body like possession. Pokeweed's berries, seductive crimson, lure the unwary, but boiled leaves redeemed duality, child, like the soul's capacity for good and ill. Judith's eyes widened, flames reflecting in her pupils like inner fire. Why the dangers? The poisons? Annie leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, the air thick with the weight of revelation. Because true power lies in knowing the edge of medicine or malediction, its measure and intent. They chain our bodies, but minds roam free. Knowledge is our sword, sheathed until needed, even unspoken, it terrifies. Judith probed gently, those men, the ones pushing for your sale. Their sicknesses. Annie's gaze held steady, enigmatic as the Sphinx. I touched not of theirs, no food, no water, no shadow crossed their paths. Yet ailments come, from tainted wells, spoiled meat, or perhaps, the poison of their own consciences, guilt festering like unchecked rot. She neither confessed nor denied, imparting a profound truth, fear of the possible wielded more might than deeds proven, a psychological specter haunting the guilty. As dawn's first blush painted the horizon, Annie bestowed her legacy, seeds bundled in cloth, maps to the marked trees where bark bore her encrypted gospel. Read the signs, spirals for strength, notches for peril. Add your own, let it grow. Judith embraced her briefly, the contact electric with transferred purpose. Will you endure, in the unknown? I've crossed rivers before, Annie replied, her tone resonant with ancestral resilience. My mother, healer in Virginia's shadows, passed the flame from her mother's, roots and soils across the sea where women communed with earth spirits. Sold at 13, I hid the light till need called it forth. Now, in new lands, I'll kindle again, surviving by seeing what others blind themselves to. Judith slipped away as the sun crested, melting into the quarter's awakening. Bustle. Annie gathered her scant belongings, a threadbare blanket, a faded dress, a pouch of seeds like talismans, and waited, seated on her stoop, the morning mist swirling around her like ethereal guardians. Morris Hampton arrived mid-morning, his wagon rumbling down the rutted drive, dust pluming like incense from a censer. A lean figure with eyes hardened by trade's grim calculus, he inspected Annie efficiently, teeth bared for appraisal, hands turned for calluses, exchanging coin with Hartwell in the shadow of the big house. She's a healer, Hartwell muttered, discomfort creasing his brow, worth double, tell her new master. Hampton grunted, chaining her wrists loosely, a concession to pragmatism over cruelty, seating her among two other souls bound for distant horizons. As the wagon lurched forward, axles creaking like reluctant confessions, Annie glanced back. Slaves clustered near the quarters, faces a mosaic of sorrow and solidarity, Judith among them, their eyes locking in silent covenant, the flame passed, unbroken. From the porch, the Hartwells observed, Constance rigid as a statue, children wide-eyed, Caroline, life-debtor, lifting a tentative hand in farewell, a gesture heavy with unspoken gratitude and regret. Annie offered no response, her gaze forward, inscrutable. Along the road, her vocal adversaries gathered, Crawford, pallid and drawn, eyes hollow as if drained by inner demons, Hughes, unsteady on his feet, Finch, averting his gaze as if fearing her stare could summon nightmares anew. They stood like sentinels at a banishment, needing visual proof of threats' removal. Annie met each look unflinchingly, her expression a blank canvas upon which their fears projected horrors. What did she know? What had she wrought? The weight of that ambiguity, like the mark of Cain, would etch into their souls, nights plagued by doubts, days shadowed by suspicion. The trek to Arkansas spanned 3 arduous weeks, landscapes shifting from Mississippi's fertile deltas to rugged hills, the wagon jolting over roots and ruts like trials in a pilgrim's journey. Hampton, ever the calculator, ensured sustenance, cornbread and jerky doled out at rests under starry vaults, preserving value for auction. Annie, unchained in spirit, catalogued the flora, sassafras along riverbanks, its roots promising tonics, jimsonweed in ditches, hallucinogenic thorns amid healing leaves. Knowledge accumulated like manna, sustaining her inner world. Sold in Little Rock's bustling market in January 1845, amid the clamor of bids and chains rattle, to Daniel Pierce, a modest farmer whose wife labored with child. Informed of her gifts, he tasked her with the birth. Annie's hands guided a healthy son into the world, cries echoing like a new covenant. On Pierce's farm, amid rolling fields and simple cabins, her reputation bloomed anew cautiously, like wildflowers after frost, treating fevers with boneset, easing labors with blue cohosh, her touch a bridge between worlds. Yet Annie's shadow lingered in Mississippi, her absence amplifying the legend. In taverns lit by oil lamps, where bourbon flowed like loosened tongues, tales embellished, the healer who cursed with a glance, plants obeying her whispers. In churches, sermons on witchcraft skirted her name, congregants shifting uneasily on pews. The quarters preserved her true essence, Judith tending the marked trees. Expanding the archive, passing whispers to the next.
Knowledge, unchained and eternal, wove through generations, a spiritual thread defying the lash, reminding that in the garden of oppression, even weeds could choke the mighty. And in quiet moments, when winds sigh through the oaks, one might hear echoes of Annie's voice. We survive by knowing, and sometimes, by letting them fear what we know. The years following Annie Turner's departure in December 1844 unfolded like a slow poison spreading through the veins of Tallahatchie County, invisible yet inexorable. The cotton fields, once humming with the rhythm of forced labor under relentless suns, now carried an undercurrent of unease that no overseer's whip could lash away. Planters gathered in smoke-filled parlors, crystal decanters catching candlelight like captured stars, their conversations circling the same enigma: had Annie truly wielded death's quiet hand, or had her mere existence, her unchained mind, been the greater crime? Debates raged in hushed tones, voices thick with bourbon and suspicion. Some insisted coincidence, fevers, fluxes, the frailties of flesh in a humid climate. Others saw retribution, a divine or earthly justice meted out through unseen means. No consensus ever formed, the ambiguity itself became the torment, a spiritual wound that festered without healing. The fear Annie inspired did not fade with the wagon's dust on the horizon. It metastasized, transforming from targeted dread into a pervasive malaise that seeped into every aspect of plantation life. Masters who once ate heartily now sampled each bite tentatively, forks hovering like hesitant prayers, eyes flicking to the kitchen doors where enslaved hands had stirred pots and seasoned greens. Wives brewed their own teas from store-bought leaves, discarding anything grown in the garden. Children were kept from wells until overseers tasted the water first. Slaves, previously viewed as mere extensions of labor, bodies to be worked, bred, disciplined, now appeared in a new light, vessels of hidden knowledge, potential bearers of retribution. Every glance from the quarters carried imagined menace, every cough in the big house evoked Crawford's headaches, Hugh's blackouts, Finch's nightmares. The system built on enforced ignorance cracked under the weight of sudden awareness. Those who cooked, gardened, nursed, and tended might possess secrets that could invert power with a single leaf. Historical records from the late 1840s and early 1850s bear witness to this epidemic of paranoia. Medical ledgers from physicians across Mississippi show a surge in white patients presenting with vague, insistent complaints, palpitations without cause, tremors like guilt's aftershocks, digestive torments blamed on something in the food. Doctors like Foster's successors noted the pattern: claims of poisoning, often without evidence, investigations yielding nothing but suspicion. Autopsies revealed no toxins in most cases, yet the accusations persisted, fueled by letters and diaries where planters confessed their terror. One overseer wrote in 1849, "I watch my plate as if it held Judgment Day. The girl is gone, yet the fear remains, like sin that clings even after confession." This wave of imagined poisonings reflected a deeper spiritual crisis. The Antebellum South's foundation rested on the myth of black inferiority. Annie's demonstrated mastery, surpassing trained physicians, shattered that illusion, forcing oppressors to confront their vulnerability in the most intimate spaces: the table, the bedroom, the cradle. Annie's story might have dissolved into the vast silence that engulfs most enslaved lives, nameless, traceless, were it not for a serendipitous discovery in 1932. Catherine Wright, a young historian pursuing her doctorate on slavery in Tallahatchie County, pored over yellowed ledgers in the county archives, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of decaying paper. Amid manifests and property transfers, Annie's name surfaced repeatedly: payments to Thomas Hartwell for medical services by Slave Annie, notations of treatments for fevers, births, stones. Intrigued by this anomaly, a slave valued for intellect rather than brawn, Wright delved deeper.
In the donated journals of Dr. Edmund Foster, bound in cracked leather, she found pages alive with conflicted admiration.
The Negro girl Annie possesses
knowledge of plants that eclipses my university training in several particulars.
Her diagnosis of Hartwell's affliction, white snakeroot contamination, was rendered with a precision that humbles me. Yet I am troubled by the breadth of her familiarity with toxins. What shadows lurk in such learning? The planter's alarm, though exaggerated, holds a kernel of reason.
Right unearthed correspondence from Crawford. I cannot prove the woman Annie wrought my suffering, yet the conviction gnaws like a hidden root.
Is it guilt for my part in her exile? Or something more calculated?
The uncertainty is its own exquisite punishment. Similar missives from Hughes and Finch echoed the theme: afflictions real, origins elusive, terror profound. Venturing to the abandoned Hartwell site, now overgrown with kudzu and wild blackberry, the big house reduced to crumbling foundations, Wright discovered the marked trees near the old quarters. Ancient live oaks and cypresses bore patterns of notches, spirals, crosses etched deep into bark, weathered but deliberate. She photographed them meticulously, consulting a botanist colleague who analyzed the system, a rudimentary yet sophisticated notation for botanical data of locations, seasons, properties medicinal and lethal. In her dissertation, Hidden Knowledge, Medical Practices Among Enslaved People in Antebellum, Mississippi, Wright declared, these carvings represent an act of profound intellectual defiance. Barred from literacy, this individual forged a private script to safeguard scientific observation, preserving what the institution sought to erase. The work remained confined to academic circles until 2019, when a multidisciplinary team archaeologists, historians, ethnobotanists returned to the site amid a broader project on Mississippi slavery. Using dendrochronology and radiocarbon dating, they confirmed carvings dated precisely to 1838 to 1844, Annie's tenure.
In a decayed hollow log, half buried under leaf mold, they unearthed a cloth bundle, seeds meticulously wrapped and separated.
Analysis revealed common healers willow, yarrow, ginger alongside three potent toxins: white snakeroot, milk sickness inducer, water hemlock, convulsive death in minutes, foxglove, heart regulator or stopper.
The careful preservation suggested intentional curation, a dual arsenal of mercy and might.
Dr. Marcus Hamilton, project lead, presented at a conference on resistance, his voice measured yet charged. Annie possessed the means to end lives at will: access to kitchens, gardens, wells, knowledge of dosage, disguise, delivery.
Yet no irrefutable poisoning links to her. Was she merely a healer, feared for disrupting racial hierarchies? Or did she master the art of psychological warfare, cultivating dread without deed? The 1844 illnesses, stress-induced, perhaps, or microdoses, non-lethal but terrifying. The ambiguity may have been deliberate.
Fear, unchecked, is a weapon more enduring than poison.
Renewed interest followed: articles, proposed documentaries, podcasts dissecting the enigma. Yet the core question persists, unresolvable: what did Annie do? What did she permit others to believe she might?
Records fade after her 1845 sale to Daniel Pierce in Little Rock. The 1850 census lists her simply: Annie, female, Negro, 28.
By 1860, she vanishes: death, resale, escape?
Arkansas whispers from the 1850s speak of a healer named in, valued yet feared, treating black and white alike.
Identity unconfirmed, trail cold. Hartwell's descendants preserved letters revealing his lingering torment.
In 1852, to his brother, I ponder that girl still, the one who knew the plants.
Did I err in selling her? She saved Caroline, then me.
Yet fear swayed me, as it swayed us all. Perhaps we feared not her actions, but the mirror she held to our souls.
Annie's true legacy transcends speculation of poison.
In a regime predicated on ignorance, her knowledge, encompassing life's restoration and its quiet termination, exposed the fragility
of control. Enslaved hands prepared meals, nursed children, tended ills. Trust, once assumed absolute, fractured under the possibility of reversal. She instilled a visceral awareness: the oppressed might harbor powers unseen, capacities for both salvation and reckoning. Whether she ever crossed from healing to harming remains shrouded, circumstantial whispers, no proof. The toxic seeds?
Perhaps for study, for balance, for contingency.
The illnesses? Coincidence, guilt's psychosomatic toll, or subtle retribution.
The uncertainty endures, a haunting echo of her quiet power.
Annie Turner was no anomaly. Countless enslaved healers, midwives, root doctors, conjurers wielded similar wisdom across the South, their names erased, their archives oral and ephemeral. Chains could bind bodies, whip scar flesh, but knowledge passed in whispers, etched in bark, buried in logs, defied suppression. Their resistance was subtle, saving lives in the quarters while sowing doubt in the big house, preserving ancestral lore against erasure, reminding oppressors that superiority was illusion. In the marked trees that still stand, defiant against time, in seeds that waited centuries to be unearthed, in letters trembling with unresolved fear, we glimpse the potency of forbidden understanding. Annie's story, fragmentary yet indelible, reminds us, power manifests not only in force, but in the dread of what might be done. In a world that sought to render people ignorant property, the greatest rebellion was to know, and to let that knowledge linger like a shadow, eternal and unchained. The question lingers not in what she did, but in what she made them believe possible. And in that belief, born of her silence and her skill, lay a quiet, profound victory, one that outlasted exile, and the grave.